Hello, everybody. I think we're live now.
Yeah, hi.
So, same familiar faces. We switched some locations. Nobody will notice if you haven't been here before, but we are still free. We are missing Thomas today, who is doing his movement from Stuttgart to Berlin, actually. So, even one Berlin or more. And just to make that sure, Joao, can you please check if we're also live on YouTube?
Yes, we are.
Okay, YouTube is running. If you really don't like crowdcasts, and there's no good reason to not like crowdcasts, actually, you can switch over to YouTube if you're dissatisfied with the streaming performance. So with that, I would like to open our little presentation here and give a short intro what this is all about. This is called the third global meetup of Coding Earth. And if you are new here, if you're wondering what Coding Earth actually is, I would like to hand over to Joao to tell you a little bit more about who we are.
So, hello everyone, I'm João from Portugal, and this is the third time we do this, and I heard some comments about the intro, that we take a long time to do the intro, but it has to be done. And let's talk about our mission. We want to be friendly and open up for developers. We only have one rule: every presentation have to include code. So it must be focused on dev-related topics, and everyone is invited to talk, to suggest, to code. And you can find us on codingearth.io. Codingearth.org.
It's coding.earth.
That's it.
Earth TLD.
I was trying to find the Slack thing, but that's not here. All right, and this is it.
So the next slide is mine. Hi, I'm Lars from Leipzig, currently also in Berlin, visiting my wonderful colleagues and friends. So these online meetups, as you already saw, this is round number 3 for us. And again, we're here with Crowdcast because it worked very smooth the last times. Here in this Crowdcast, the speaker gets the focus. So we invite him on the stage, and then he can share his slides, and you have full focus on him. You can ask him questions with this Ask a Question button on the bottom of the page. If you see new questions there and think they are interesting, you can vote on these questions, of course, but the speaker can go into these questions at any time or at the end of his talk. And you can chat on the right side, of course. Yeah, and there's also this wonderful clip moment function on the bottom. When you find something very interesting, you can click the clip moment and you get a 10-second or 30, yeah, I think 10-second rewind. And this is then recorded for a short time span, and you can share it with your friends and colleagues. Also, as Stefan said, we are streaming this live to YouTube, and the stream will be available afterwards.
I mean, if I really find a spare minute on my weekends, I usually even cut the recordings and do a remastering of them. You can find them on our YouTube channel. Don't be confused that it's the Turbine Kreuzberg YouTube channel, but it's the place where we're hosting it. Really good for analytics. And you're absolutely free to share everything you see here on Twitter, on Facebook, on, well, whichever social platform you like. And with that, thank you, Lars. I would like to show you what you're going to experience today. So we again found 3 amazing speakers. And it's always the same thing, you know, right after Coding Earth meetup is before the next Coding Earth meetup, and you're always wondering, okay, oh my God, what are we doing next time? And it's always not that hard to find speakers. So I'm really thankful for Max, for Robert, and for Joao to contribute their sessions today. Today we're going to hear 3 sessions. The first one by Max on automating pixels with Banner Bear and N8N. I hope it's really called N8N. I will invite you to the stage in a couple of seconds, Max, so please be prepared. Next, right after Max, there's Robert. Many of you might know him from other conferences, meetups, or wherever. He's talking quite a bit because this is his job. He's developer advocate for Platform SH, and today he's going to talk about activity scripts, a JS-powered framework for extending Platform SH from the inside, which is some kind of, I guess, of JavaScript automation in Platform SH. And the last talk, and I'm really looking forward to this one, is called Coding Fast and Slow. And Joao will dig deep into how your brain works and how you can trick your brain, I guess. I hope I'm not telling bullshit here, to become a better or more proficient developer. Okay, I'll close my slides here. Now let's see if we can find Max in our audience. No. Max has left. Oh, here, there he is. Sorry, Max, I invite you. Here we go. That's good.
Hi, everyone. How's it going?
Hi, Max.
Hey.
Max, good to have you here.
Fantastic. Well, first off, I just wanted to say thanks to the Coding Earth team for having me here. I'm really excited to talk to a developer audience with this topic, because I think that's kind of an audience can really go take the concepts I'm going to put together here and really go do something a lot cooler than maybe what I'm able to do with it. On that note, I am going to share my screen here.
No, you cannot, because we are still 4. We have to kick somebody. Who wants to leave first? Ciao, Joao.
Thank you kindly. Okay.
So you can share your screen.
Fantastic. Cheers.
Lars, just a minute, second. Lars and me will just mute ourselves and put you on full screen. So this is your stage. And now virtually, please give it away for Max.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And then before I start, could I just confirm that you can see my screen here?
We can see it.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm Max Takash, and today I'm going to talk about automating pixels with Bannerbear and N8N. And in a nutshell, we're going to show how to procedurally generate graphic banners. And before we get stuck into that, I did want to just define what I mean by graphic banner, because it's perhaps not a standardized term. But in my, when I'm talking about a graphic banner, I mean something exactly like this Coding Earth graphic here. It's a combination of information and graphics that together forms a banner. So this one in particular is actually a really good example of the kinds of things we're going to hope to generate after this walkthrough here. If you notice, there's lots of different information that together is combining to make this banner. We have, for example, some static information like global meetup or this logo here. And then we have some dynamic information that changes each time. For example, the number of the meetup, one-to-many avatar images here, etc. So together, by combining some dynamic inputs and some static templates, we could generate multiple variations. And this is something that, as a designer, I've done a lot in my career, which is create a template and then manually, either you're getting the spec from someone or you're getting the assets and you're putting it together. And it's a very uncreative part of the creative process. So hopefully we can show how to get that legwork automated so people can be more creative, and then individuals who maybe aren't professional designers can maybe access this world and create cool banners for the projects and things that they happen to be working on. So before I define the tools that we'll use today to make this all happen, I did want to just give a little background on myself. I'm the head of design at N8N, so that's correct, Stefan, on the pronunciation. N8N or Nodemation is totally fine. And my responsibilities span product and brand, but given we're a small team, it's mostly focused on the product side of things right now. My background is formally in design, in UI UX, and in psychology. But in my high school years, I dabbled a lot with PHP, or making WordPress plugins and that sort of thing. So I like to think that I can code with very much Stack Overflow support. But I do love building stuff. That's why I'm really lucky to be a product designer, and why I'm excited to talk to a crowd that also likes to build stuff, because I think if my sort of script kiddie background can do some workflows with some simple code, that you'll be able to take this hopefully to the next level and do some really cool workflows generating lots of different banners. So we'll quickly run over the tools that we're going to use today. The star of the show is Bannerbear today. And so Bannerbear, it launched in January. It's a small project, and it's a really cool project run by John, the founder. I've had a few emails back and forth with them, but in a nutshell, what they do is allow you to create templates and then expose some of the layers in that template as a REST API that you can then consume to create variations of banners. So this is their template editor here, and it looks very similar to Sketch, if that's a software you're familiar with. But like most image editing applications, there's a concept of various layers on top have this sort of higher Z index, and layers on the bottom have a lower Z index. And then for each layer in this banner bear editor in particular, there's various properties that you can manipulate, which are closely modeled after CSS properties. So it's pretty easy, I think, for someone that's done some front end to get in here and kind of understand what's going on. And then of all the layers that you can add to a banner bear template, some, in fact, most of them can be dynamic layers, which when you add them and set them up, you can then consume them when you're calling the sort of create a banner endpoint. So for example, if we were to add an image layer and call it main, or sorry, if we were to call it image, then when we're calling API, we simply pass a URL to a JPEG or a PNG, and then that would swap out that layer in that template. And this is just a quick example of the kinds of things that Banner Bear is doing right now with their tool on their own channels. We see this sort of some quote posts here, and as well, they have this cool little series where they're comparing sort of, I think, the philosophies of two different founders in a cool retro aesthetic. So why I think this is good to show is we can see clearly the sort of template working here because we have various content switching out. But why I think it's good to show this in particular is that, you know, by combining dynamic data sources with Artifice, we can create something that's really cool. Because, you know, if these were simply coming in as just the text here in Arial, or if these were just two images with a VS maybe typed out here without the styling, it would be much less impactful. And ultimately, design allows us to sort of communicate information better. So if you can combine the important information or something that you're trying to communicate, that's something you're passionate on, could be something at work, could be a passion project you're working on, like coding Earth, for example, then what you can do is combine that with the Artifice and get a nice shiny banner that will hopefully get more engagement and more exposure on the things that you're working on and are passionate about. So at a high level, what we're doing here is extracting, transforming, and loading data. So I'd like to borrow this concept from databases. And essentially, we're going to be ingesting one-to-many API sources. Most likely, there will be API sources. We're going to transform that in some way to ready that into a Banner Bear call that we can make. And we'll load it into Banner Bear, and we'll get from Banner Bear, then spit it out an image. The reason I like to highlight this is I think that it's this transform step here that a development crowd has the biggest propensity to do really cool things with, because transforming data is sort of, in a lot of ways, something you're doing a lot in development. And then to make that all possible, to the ETL sort of parts of this, interacting with APIs, manipulating data, and then loading it into Banner Bear and getting it back from Banner Bear, we're going to use N8N. And so what I'd love to do is just give you a quick orientation on what this tool is. And in a nutshell, it's a workflow automation tool, and it's node-based. So if you're not familiar with a node-based workflow, it essentially has the concept of various nodes. So for here, this is a node for third-party integration, and that node has specific functions that it can perform. Now, if we combine multiple nodes, and by combine I mean sort of route one to another, the actions performed in this node might generate data, which can be accessed by this node, and then the relationship is sort of a flow-through relationship. So once this one completes, then this node here can manipulate that data and then do something with it. So I think there's a lot of workflow tools out in the market. What I like particularly about N8N, beyond having sort of a bunch of integrations, is a lot of these core nodes that let you get under the hood quickly. So one good example of that is an HTTP request. And so an HTTP request allows you, as you can imagine, to perform an HTTP request. And why I like this example in particular is, as someone who's not coding professionally, who maybe is doing a little hobby project here and there, I'm always getting blocked by authentication, for example. Like I was making a little Chrome extension at work that allows us to, on GitHub, from a individual issue on GitHub, turn that into an issue in our Jira. And overall, it took maybe an hour to make and about 3 hours to figure out the cause errors that happen from authentication. So with N8N, it's as easy as dropping down what type of authentication you might want for this particular node, and then selecting all the other sorts of options and parameters that you might usually have in a curl request, but with a visual UI. So to demonstrate this node very quickly, I'm going to use a rather simple API that I found, and it's called myMemory, which allows you to translate a piece of text. So you pass as a parameter, Q parameter is the text you want to translate, and then a language pair with the language you want to translate from and the language you want to translate to. So if we copy this call example and go into our HTTP request here, we can select the authentication type. Now, if it were to be OAuth, for example, or one of these other ones, you could select that and then select an existing credential that we have in our N8N, or add a new one. And so these credentials in particular are living on my local machine, because as you can see, I'm hosting locally. Since we're a fair code project, you're freely available to sort of download the source code and host it how you like. So we're going to have no authentication for this, just a quick sample. And the URL, let's open this up. I'm going to paste in this myMemory endpoint, and we're going to take out this Q property, but we'll keep the language pair in here, just so I can demonstrate how you can add things that you might usually need to in an HTTP request. And so here, just adding a parameter for this API. And at this point, we can test this node on its own. So when we do that, we see that we got a response, and we can see it in tabular form or JSON form, and it translated our hello world to Charmondo. So great. So in a few seconds, we were able to get this HTTP request up and running. Now, similar types of core nodes that we have are things like conditional logic, an if or a switch, and then also function nodes, which can execute arbitrary JavaScript. So when we add this function node, we can decide to have our HTTP request, once that's done, trigger this function node, and then from within our function node, perhaps manipulate some data from our HTTP request in this function node. And then from there, we might send it to Airtable or any number of other destinations. So that's why I think N8N is a flexible tool in building these sorts of ETL workflows, because this transform step, let's say we have a banner bear node that we pull in an HTTP request, and we want to just translate some text and put that in a banner. This transform here could be very simple. At the same time, this could be a very complicated series of nodes that are pulling in AI or machine learning sort of insights from a third-party source, or pulling in information from multiple databases, comparing it, doing something, and then sending it to Banner. So in that way, I think N8N is a great tool for doing these sorts of things, because it's simple, but then as soon as you need to, you can get under the hood and see the sorts of properties and parameters that you're used to when you're developing, just with less friction. So I personally love that, because again, authentication for me is always just a major headache. So N8N is what we're going to use to do all this extracting, transforming, and loading. So the next step, we're going to actually create a banner generation workflow. And so what I'd like to do today is spend a bit of time showing kind of more of a hello world example with getting a banner up and going. And then from there, we'll show a few ways that we could expand upon that and make maybe something a little less trivial. Because again, at the end of the day, I think whatever I show you here the best examples that you could hope to generate are going to be ones where you're thinking about your actual use cases, the data existing in your organization, be it a hobby project, be it something you're doing at work, and building like a real solution around that. So the first step is to identify the input sources that we might hope to use so that we can ingest them, figure out how we might need to transform them. And then once we know what input sources we're going to use, we can design the template in Banner and then create the workflow in NAN, and then we're going to generate some banners. So when we're identifying an input source, there's two types of sources I like to sort of think about, at least conceptually, if you're trying to get your head around it. So the first one is structured sources. So you're building it around your template. So you know you want this kind of template, and maybe you create a type form to get exactly the inputs that you need for your internal team to use, or you're trying to come up with some content that you can make from something you're already doing, an existing unstructured source. And this might be a GitHub project that you have. You want activity updates at the end of each week for the community, or something from your SaaS app, or some sort of webhook. And these are things you're already doing, so you want to capitalize on that and maybe bring light to it. Either way, whatever your sources are, you just need to make sure that you have well-formed call to Banner in this sort of simple format, where each one of this sort of name here is the name of a layer, and then the various information that you might be able to swap out for that layer. And the source that we're going to use today is CocktailDB. And so CocktailDB is a crowdsourced database of lots of various cocktails around the world. And what's great about this service is they have an API, and then for each cocktail they have a nice image and various information like the glass that it comes in, and instructions, etc. So what we're going to create today, using this as an input source, is a cocktail recipe banner. And to make that all possible, we're going to use the random API endpoint that they have, which just looks up a random cocktail. So if we see us doing that here, we just pull that, we see the drink that it pulled in was a Casino Royale, and now a fruit shake, etc. So as we do this, we need to make sure that we're taking a look at this response and know sorts of the types of layers that we might want to use in our template. So when I'm looking at this, to save a bit of time here, I'm seeing that there's this string drink thumb, which is the image of the cocktail itself. So that's great, we'll use that in the template. And then we have the name of the drink, and we also have the instructions for the drink as well. So that for me is probably good enough to get started on the template, because it's a bit of a sort of a back and forth process between the template and comparing your source. So I like to have this open as I'm making the template. To do that, let's go over into Banner and create a new project. Let's call it Coding Earth. And in a project, you can then add one or many templates, and they always create a welcome template. But let's create one from scratch just to show you how that works. So we'll, from our project level, create a template. There's various sizes that you can choose. We're going to go with a square size, 1000 by 1000 pixels, because this works for a lot of different social media applications. And then we're going to edit the template. So I'm going to kind of run through the creating the template side of things, because I want to be showing the code and the sort of the transform stuff a lot more. But what we'll do is we'll add some layers. So the first layer that we'll add is an image rectangle, and we want to make sure that we choose this one and not this one, because this is going to be our cocktail image, so we want it to be dynamic. When we add that, we see it's added here, and then similar to Photoshop or other photo editing tools, we can then sort of resize that image. Now, the only thing we really have to do here is give it a recognizable name, because this is will be used in the API call. So let's call that cocktail image. And then the type here for the image is actually how it resizes, sort of related to object fit. So we're going to just go with fill there. So it'll fill the frame, even though we have a square image that's coming in from CocktailDB, just in case something else, some other kind of image happens there. And then we'll add some static images, and we'll upload these. I have some prepared here. Again, not going to spend too much time showing on how to design graphics. I made these in Illustrator, for example, but there's lots of free resources for graphics and that sort of thing. And these ones in particular, I don't have to worry about giving them a unique name because I'm not going to necessarily be interacting with these images. So what you've seen here is that I do have a few graphic assets that I decided to make in Illustrator, not in Banner. And I do recommend, if you're doing something sort of complex and want some sort of artifice in there, that you do that first in Banner or before you go into Banner. And then we'll just add some text here, right align it. And then this, because this is a dynamic layer, we do have to give it a name. So this is going to be our cocktail name. And let's make that white. And then just quickly, we'll add the recipe text. And again, not going into too much detail on what we're doing in this Banner template, because this is a coding exercise. We're going to get to that in a few seconds here. So this will now be our recipe text. Once we save that template, we can now pop over to N8N and get started. So let's create a new workflow. And what we're going to do is get our HTTP request. And this has the data from our previous request here, but what we want to do is grab this random endpoint, and this one again doesn't need any authentication, but we're just gonna put that in there. And we also don't need any queries or anything, so let's just call that and see, can we get a response back, getting a Jamaica kiss, fantastic. So next, what we need to do is send this HTTP request, the outputs of that to Banner. So click that here. And by default, it automatically connects the node to the previous one you added. And then in Banner, I actually do have credentials already. But if you were to create new ones, you would just add the project API key, which can be found at the project home here in API key settings. It's rather intuitive. But so I already have one, so we'll set that up here. Now the resource that we want to interact with is the sort of creating an image endpoint, and we want to create. And then the template ID is actually something that's automatically pulled in. So we'll use this one here. And additional fields are contextual to the node, and in this case, we want to use the wait for image functionality, which for Banner specifically polls the endpoint a few times because it takes the image about a second to be created. And then we can add our various modifications. So the name here is the layer name, and it also automatically pulls that in. So let's say the cocktail image. And since we've specified the name, now we can choose what sort of parameter we want to swap out. We want to be swapping out for the cocktail image layer. If you recall, it's this background image. Here in template 2, we want to be swapping that background image out. So we're going to go ahead and select the image URL here, and we're going to actually use the expression feature of N8N. So what that lets you do is look at information and data available in previous nodes and then use that as expressions in parameters of the current node. So here we have HTTP request, it's output data, and this is available to us because we routed this node into our Banner node. And then here we need to find the drink thumbnail right there. Perfect. And we see here's the expression, and that's how it's rendering out. And then we just need to do the same for a cocktail name, which here is the text property that we're changing. Again, we go into this HTTP request node, drill down in here, And then we got to find the name of the drink, Jamaica Kiss. And here it's populating the previous execution that's stored in the previous node right now, which is great for testing. And then lastly, we'll add the recipe text, which is also manipulating or swapping at the text portion. And then we have recipe, yeah, instructions. Great. Let's try it. This will take a few seconds, and the Banner node is a bit longer than some of the other nodes because it's actually generating an image on their side. And okay, in this particular case, we had an error, which is actually useful because by default, we're only going to wait 3 times. So let's kick that up. Maybe they're having a bit of delays on their side.
It's always how the professionals are debugging, right? If it's not working, just retry it.
Of course, yes. And I'm sure some of the more technical audiences here might say, well, you know, polling isn't the best way to do this. And that's definitely true at scale. But we added this functionality because we think a lot of use cases for people might be, you know, to generate 10 or 5 banners and not 1,000. But if you are looking to generate them at scale, please do contact us on the forums because I'd love to figure out that functionality with you and make sure you're able to do that. But we got a response here, it's completed. In the tabular form, we can get the untruncated image URL here. And let's see if that worked. It did indeed. So obviously, you know, a graphic designer might say, we need to tune this up a little bit. But what I want to show you today is the crux of what we're doing here. And as you can see, this was rather simple to hook this up to HTTP request and then to Banner. And now if we hook it up to the start node, we can actually execute the entire workflow. I have a few minutes left here. So what I wanted to do quickly is just show you where we could go from here. And then again, we're seeing another one generated. Great. So we created the workflow, we generated some banners. Here are some examples. One thing to note is that plan for funky outputs. Please, please, please don't have this going direct to Twitter. And if you are, have a think about, you know, is that acceptable to have some funky outputs? Like in this example, the recipe text doesn't always list the ingredients. They might just say, shake all the ingredients. So that's fine if you're writing the ingredients, let's say in the post of the tweet, but it's something to look out for. So if you're doing this for work, I highly recommend having it go to like an Asana or a Hootsuite or something like that, where a human can kind of pick the best output and have that scheduled for dissemination. So we did a kind of a hello world example. I think beyond this, it's really in the transforms how this gets cool. Human transforms, I think, are very interesting. The concept of having your workflows interact with people as if it's a person. So if this was a chatbot, maybe it's scanning Twitter, and when it finds what it thinks might be a juicy tweet for your topic, it sends it to you on Slack and asks for you to either approve or deny that, and then it generates a banner, or perhaps it allows you to copy edit that and only take a snippet of that tweet, and then triggers that. Or in Asana, it might be you creating a card and assigning it to a bot, and then that bot moves it in the Kanban board from in progress to complete, and maybe pinging people to write additional information that's necessary in the meantime as it's completing a handful of workflows to get that banner done or get all the information it needs to be able to make that banner call. So that's like a really, I think, exciting avenue for some of these transforms. And if you're doing those, I would just recommend try and model them around how people might work together. But you know, in the last few years, IBM Watson, Google Cloud, they have a lot of, I think, really accessible AI, and I use that term loosely, it's mostly machine learning APIs that you can get up and going with free tiers. So that's an example that I wanted to quickly show here, because photos is something that you're going to probably do a lot in banners, and cropping people is something that's rather not trivial. And what I mean by cropping is sort of adjusting their face and framing them correctly. In this example, if this image was passed into a Banner Bear sort of circular image, this is how it would come out with the object fit set to fill. And this is how you might want it on the right here if a designer were to actually crop it. So we could solve this by using the Google Vision API, which, they do a lot of crazy stuff on the background. But what you do is you simply call an API and send it an image, and the response is a bounding box like this. So that could be then used to create a workflow where you're calling the Vision API with the image that got uploaded. Perhaps it's into a typeform, so the image or the typeform asks someone to upload their profile photo. And then we process that Vision request. We might need to sort of transform the JSON response there into something more usable for our crop image node to be able to crop that image and then send that along to Banner Bear. Beyond this simple example and potentially using some really cool ML libraries or APIs to get more complex transforms, I did want to just show you one that I made the other day. And this was a multi-language cocktail banner, just to show you how N8N can kind of go beyond just kind of a linear A to B sort of thing. So I think some of our competitors kind of do that a lot. So this HTTP request, it's the exact same one from the Cocktail DB library. And here we have an English banner. And so what this is doing for the modifications for the recipe, the text that it's using, let's actually execute this so we can get some test data. And I'll be able to show you. But in essence, this node and this German node, the only difference between them is we're selecting a different key value pair from this response to populate our banner. So in the German node, we can see that the text that we used is the instructions DE, which is something that came natively in the response that we got from Cocktail DB. And in the English one, we're using the English version of that. And now, when we're uploading, for example, the English banner to our Trello, in a similar way, Trello has sort of a contextual a list of properties here that you can change. And here we're creating a card to a particular list ID, and the name of the card is an expression, which is here the name of our drink, banner, and then EN. And then for the German one, we're doing the same thing, but in German. So what we see here is the HTTP request just here created an amaretto sweet and sour. And now in Trello, we've created an amaretto sweet and sour with the description that's populated by variables and text that we wrote in our expression editor. So we'll click on this image. Here is the amaretto sweet and sour. As you can see, there's a little snafu here. We'll probably would have to validate our inputs and truncate some things or do something there when we have long names. But then what's really nice about N8N is, we had English and we had German, but we didn't have Italian. So I'm using the My Memory API from the example earlier, and we're pulling in the cocktail recipe, and we're then having this HTTP request to My Memory translate the description, and I see the translation that comes back here. So then in this Italian banner, and I'm just checking here, I've got 1 more minute left. In this Italian banner, we're then selecting the text from our first HTTP request node. But then for the recipe text, getting the outputs of our second HTTP request node. And these can also be renamed. So they can see here, we have German banner and English banner. These might be a bit more readable if I were to rename those. But then in here, we're pulling in the Italian translation that we got back from our API. And then this Trello card, the only difference here from the other ones is that the name of it, we had the IT label here. So then when we call this, we're getting these cards generated also magically with N8N. So again, I'm not a developer. I was able to put these together rather quickly, as you were able to see. And I think, if you look at the sort of the real use cases that you're working on, etc., you probably have a lot cooler ideas and can take that transform step onto a rocket ship and onto that next level. So thank you very much for this talk. We do have forums at NAN, and it's also completely free to use. So please, if you are creating some banner workflows and have some ideas or questions, anything, I'm very passionate about this. So I'd love to jam with you and chat with you and help you kind of achieve whatever the idea is that you might have. I'm Max T on the forums. And then lastly, I'll just switch over here. And as it's probably finished, we'll see that that workflow that we just executed now rendered. And once again, got another banner. So again, it's imperfect, but given that you can make much more complicated transforms, and as developers, you're sort of used to validating data, I'm sure that's something that you could shore up with N8N. And again, please do ping me if you are working through some stuff, because I'd love to personally help you achieve your graphic banner workflows in particular.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you very much.
Lars, you have to clap. I have to look for the applause.
Cheers. Thank you. And I'm glad on the time. I see we didn't run out of time. Thanks. Run out of time there. But generally, I think, I really just scratched the surface. So I'm happy to follow up one-on-one in the forums. And I realize now that the ask a question feature wasn't something that I was seeing. So I'm seeing that there's one here. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Unfortunately,
okay.
this is just a placeholder question.
Okay, no problem, kein problem. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me on this talk.
That's really great. So if nobody else wants to ask a question, you're still here for 3 minutes, I guess. So you're still, everybody's allowed to join the chat room and ask questions there. Let me have a quick glance on YouTube. Also, no questions. Cool. But I think I have been a first-time user of this "if this then that" tool, which came up, I don't know, early 2012 or something.
I remember IFTT. I remember not really knowing how to pronounce it at first, right? As well.
Yeah. IFTTT, what is it? IF3T. So I'm still getting their newsletters, and it's, from my perspective, it's really a helpful tool because I sometimes use it for running some kind of cron jobs and triggering jobs, let's say 4 p.m. or something.
Sure.
I'm wondering, can you just like assemble some kind of workflow on N8N and put this as a web service somewhere so I can replace my backend with it in some sense?
Yeah, so I think that's a use case that we've sort of been jamming on. I think in a lot of ways it could replace some sort of back-end functionality and that sort of thing and do some heavy lifting. And a few of those reasons is because we do have a webhook trigger, and we do have sort of various triggers and even the ability to rather easily with TypeScript create your own custom node. And since you're hosting it locally, there's no centralized app store or anything like that. You write your node and then you can upload it. So I think between using webhooks and the function nodes and then being able to create your own node, if you really want to do something that's not possible with those, that it's definitely possible. And we're using it, for example, with a lot of, there's probably a dozen cool little Mathemos / commands that Tane's put together that we're using, and that's sort of running all the time, and then on a local instance that we have here at the office that anyone can use. So yeah, it's very flexible for sort of replacing portions of some sort of backend logic or some kind of CRUD or ETL that maybe isn't so fun to do, but also for some fun projects, as you saw in these examples.
Oh, we're doing lots of ETL work here in our backends, and I know that this is quite a pain if you have to adhere to some kind of programming language. Having a heavy visualization is really helpful if you have to deal with like complex data that has to be transformed. And this is just a cocktail example, but if you think about like transforming business data, PIM data, e-commerce data, this is really helpful, I'd say.
Absolutely, that's what I'm finding, because when it comes to relational databases, I've used I think the MySQL tool for mapping out a simple relational database, and it's very helpful at that architecture stage. But then when you're building something, I think it's even more helpful to sort of have that visualization, because when you have maybe in Sublime 12 tabs open and things aren't working, it's nice to get that visualization. So for me, that's a really helpful step, because again, Like if I'm ever coding, like I have Stack Overflow open, like with syntax, it's just not strong enough because I'm not doing it too often. This lets me kind of remove a lot of that barrier to just do the actual transforms you want to do and not, again, authenticate. And I harp on about that because really for me, that is the bane of my existence when it comes to working on anything is authenticating.
Authentication can be a pain. I'm actually an Auth0 fan and of course a DID fan, SSI fan, whatever, but it's really helpful to have these kind of tools at hand. So Max, thank you so much for giving me our little meetup here. We share everything on Twitter. If you don't mind, your recording will go online by maybe Sunday, depending on my weekend plannings.
Fantastic. And then,
with all your friends.
Great. And I'd just like to say a last big thank you. I mean, I haven't done the presentation or anything like that in probably years, and this just felt so good to sort of prepare this and talk about something I'm passionate about. So thank you, everyone, so much.
Very cool.
Good, Max.
Bye.
Tschüss.
Have a good one.
Tschüss.
And as you already might have noticed, we got, I think, Köln in the house, right, Robert?
Köhler Olaf. Köln is in the house.
Live long and prosper. Good to have you here, Robert. We had a very short chat yesterday about if Crowdcast is working for us. I think it works out quite well today. What have you brought for us?
Yeah, so thanks. Let me share my screen and then we can get right into it. And then it probably works better if I share you something other than the Coding Earth screen, which is probably recursive. Yeah, so I'm Robert Douglas, and I'm the Chief DevRel Officer at Platform SH. And today I'm going to talk to you about two exciting new features that we've added in recent times to Platform SH. But let's start a little bit with what is Platform SH. It's a platform as a service, which means that it is a web application hosting platform. It's Git driven. It means that you launch your platform on platform.sh by basically pushing your application's Git repository to our Git servers, and that deploys your application. It's also managed, meaning that we manage all of the backend services that you would use in your application. For example, your InfluxDB or your Kafka, PostgreSQL, Mongo, MySQL, from a list of services that we manage. And if you can't build your application with those services, then we can't host your application, but it's a fairly generous list in terms of standard web applications these days. And then maybe the last thing I want to tell you about that, if I switch now to a specific project, and Stefan will recognize the Coding Earth project here, but the one that I'm going to show you today, it has the interesting feature that it's, I'm going to use a Drupal site as a test site, and that's deployed to the master branch, but you'll see that there are also these other Git branches called staging and update dependencies. And the third interesting feature that I can mention about Platform SH is that every time you create a new Git branch on our Git server, then it creates an entirely new running environment for you. So if you're familiar with Drupal, it's a PHP application that's database driven, so it needs a MySQL server to run. So this is the architecture. It's very simple. It's just a PHP environment and a database. But it also has uploaded files and caches that get written to disk sometimes, and it can have other services like a Redis server or an Elasticsearch server, and those have persistent data too. So the cool thing is when you create the branch like staging or update dependencies, you get the data from those as well in place. So you've got really a running copy of the application. So let's see the application. It's not super exciting, but we'll take a look. So here's the master branch. It's a freshly installed Drupal server or a Drupal website. If I then also look at the update dependencies branch, you'll see that it's identical. And if the data were not in place, then I wouldn't be able to show you this site. It's completely isolated from the master branch. And as a developer on this branch, I can do anything I want to it, include having my own pipelines around testing and development. So those are the nice features about Platform SH. I should also say that we build code from package manager files, such as, in this case, Composer JSON or Composer lock files, but that can also be package JSON, for Node NPM type stuff, or pip. You can use Maven to build your Java applications, and all of those then get run as part of the building pipeline on Platform SH. Okay, there's the introduction to Platform SH and what it's all about. Now, one of the problems that we want to solve for our customers is to be able to maintain the updated status of their site easily, okay? And we have a lot of customers who run fleets of sites, so sometimes dozens or thousands of sites, and oftentimes those are very similar sites. For example, if you're a software vendor and you're reselling our service to host your customers' websites of your software, and you roll out a new version of your software, you want to have an organized way to update all of the sites that your customers are running. And by organized, I mean you want to automate it as much as possible, but you also want to make sure that you don't break anything, especially since the type of software vendor that would choose a PaaS, a platform as a service, as a hosting solution is usually the type of software that you can extend, like a Drupal or a WordPress or a Magento, or I'm naming only PHP, Discourse. Okay, there's a Ruby example. Maybe you want to provide your customers with Discourse sites with Ruby gems that they can pay for, and they all have new versions and updates. You want to do it organized. So, but they might be able to extend it too. They might be able to customize it themselves, like you can with a WordPress site. So they might have custom code in the environments. So you can't just clobber them with your new update, because you might break what they've done and then they'd be mad at you and nobody would be happy. So when I say an organized way to roll out the updates, I mean usually to do it on a new branch or environment that the customer can go validate and then merge into their master branch, which is the productive running branch. And I should add that master branch is being renamed to main branch on Platform SH as on GitHub. Watch for that change soon.
I was actually thinking about doing a demonstration on how you can update all your master branches to main branches. This is a topic came up yesterday, right? Everybody's renaming, and our developers usually use trunk. You can put in the chat what you actually prefer. Sorry, Robert, for interrupting you.
No, absolutely. It's a very interesting topic, and it's generated so much discussion internally, but that's for another day. Yeah. So what am I going to show you today? I'm going to show you two new features that work together to help solve this problem of having an organized way of updating your sites. And I'm going to demonstrate on this site, but imagine that we're talking sometimes about vendors who have thousands of sites running similar software, and they want to push out those changes to all of those sites. So the first feature that I want to talk about is called source operations, which is a beta feature. And basically, this is the idea that you can programmatically update your Git repository, all right? And the use case for that should be really obvious in the context that I just gave you. The use case is that I want to run Composer update in the case of this Drupal site, because it's Composer based, and I want that to be committed to the Platform SH Git repository so that it triggers a build of that updated Drupal site with all of the updated Composer dependencies, so that the customer can test that on a branch before merging that into production. And that saves a lot of time and a lot of effort for a developer to have to go in, check out the source code, run Composer update, push that back to the branch, and then imagine doing that for 1,000 sites. So a source operation is something that you can easily define in one of your principal YAML files on Platform SH, the platform application YAML file, as defining a source operation. You give an arbitrary name. In this case, the arbitrary name is update, and then you define the command that runs when you run the source operation update, which in this case is to composer update, and then add the lock file, give a commit message, and then it's committed to your Git repository. And this can also be branch specific. So that's basically the entire idea. You can run arbitrary code at this point. So if you need to do things like use curl to get a package, or awk and grep and replace some strings in files, or move files, or even conditional logic depending on the branch that you're on, you can do all of that there. You can even make external calls to the internet, well, like I said, with curl. So this is quite powerful. The salient feature about it is that in the end, you are allowed, in this specific context only, to programmatically commit something new to the branch that this is run on. Okay, so there's new feature number one. There's more documentation on it. I won't go into it because the rest is just detail that, yeah, you won't need to know to understand what I'm going to show today. All right, that's one feature. Now the second feature, which is what I advertised on the name of this talk, is newer as of last week, and it's called activity scripts. And let me just say for the record right now that I am incredibly envious of Max T's N8N.io user interface, because that would be perfect for showing you activity scripts. It's like the perfect tool for stringing together webhook thingies, and activity script is exactly that. It's a webhook thingy.
We'll just thank you for sharing the Twitter handles. Be sure of that. You can integrate them anytime.
Absolutely, and that's going to be one of my next weekend projects as soon as I'm not on paternity leave. So,
okay, we call you in a year.
Exactly, right? You know, when my son turns 18, well, yeah, I'll do that. So I'm going to talk about activity scripts, which is basically a context within a project on Platform SH for running scripts, specifically JavaScript code, which is contextually aware of what's going on in Platform at specific points in time. So those are the activities. So you can imagine in a platform as a service hosting situation, if I go back to, where did I close it? Well, that was silly of me. If I go back to one of my projects, anytime I do anything on a project, such as add variables, add new users, add a domain, add a new branch, update a branch, basically, you know, add a new service, anything that I do that I could do here basically triggers an activity. And there are some listings of that as well. So if I go to the listing of that there, it's kind of hidden, but they're here. And these are all the activities you can do. So like if I modify the title, if I update the domain or delete the domain, if I do a backup or a restore of the backup, or I delete a backup, then I have a context of that activity and I can run a script, a JavaScript. So I'm going to show you now, just with that basic understanding of those two features, how we've created a proof of concept Drupal site that auto updates itself every night at 5 in the morning and commits the updates to a specific branch in your project, which can then be reviewed and merged by an administrator. Okay, to do that, we're going to jump into the code. Going to go into presentation mode, and I'm going to explain that this file that I'm showing you is a YAML file called .platform.app.yaml, and its purpose is to define everything that happens in the application from a Platform SH point of view. Okay, so for example, it gives the name of the app, very creatively called app. It defines the PHP runtime as PHP 7.2. I could update that to 7.4 just by changing that number and committing it. It defines that the app talks to MySQL, and it does a whole bunch of other things that I've that you can look up online or that I've already talked about on Coding Earth, so don't need to go back into it. Now, there are a couple interesting things in here regarding both the activity scripts and the source operations. So basically, the first one that you want to see is here under source operations update. So basically, I composer install, and I use composer to pipe that output into a diff file in JSON format, and then I end up adding the composer lock and that newly formatted diff file to the repositories, and basically changing and updating three files, or two files, the composer lock and the composer diff JSON. So this one is the basis for which the project is built, and this one shows is an externalization of what the differences are. Okay, then I get a get commit message that says update composer dependencies, etc. All right, so that's the source operation. And remember, it's just something that's scripted that can then be committed to the Git repository of the branch that this is run on. All right, that's the source operation demo. Now, the thing that makes it automatic is the use of a cron, which runs at 5 in the morning every day, which runs the, it first synchronizes the environment that it's on. Well, okay, one line at a time, slow here. First, if it's on the environment, update dependencies, and you'll see in my list of environments on this project that I've specifically created this. So this is a case of naming convention. If I have a branch, an environment called update dependencies, then it will run on exactly that branch and no other branch, which is great because then I know that's where all of the automatic updated code is. So then it uses the synchronize command to get the code and the data from its parent branch, which in this case is the master branch, which means that if I've committed anything to the master branch, it will pull that in, so it's not updating an out-of-date version of the website. And it also pulls in the data because if we're going to do a test pipeline on this, then you always want to have the latest data from the master site, from the production site, to run that testing on. So this way I could do functionality testing, I could do visual regression testing on this at some point. I don't do it in this example, but using that data, you could do that. And then I run that source operation, which is defined down here, and I do that on the cron every day at 5 o'clock. So already that's a pretty cool set of features. Already those 7-8 lines of YAML make it so that I have a branch on my project that updates its code every night at 5 a.m. Okay, let's take it one step further, and I'm going to show you how then, when that happens, I can get a Slack notification. And that's where the activity script comes in. The activity script, if you remember, is when something happens on Platform SH within a specific context, I can execute arbitrary JavaScript code. So let's look at the code that we want to execute for that, and that's in this file called script composer diff slack.js. I didn't name that file. All right, I'm not going to go through all of this. There are some helper functions up here. This one basically formats a Slack message with a Slack URL that it pulls in from an environmental variable in your platform project. I'll explain that more in a second. And it basically formats that and does a post to the Slack URL. And if you're familiar with Slack applications, that's a way that to make an application that you can add to a specific Slack channel with a specific callback URL. And that's how I'm going to show you that we're going to get a Slack message in the Slack channel at the right time. What else is there? Not much. This just looks for the, it just takes the output of the composer diff file that we did and saves it. So the whole purpose of that composer diff file was to externalize what changed so that we can tell people via Slack what changed during the update. So totally simple code here. It just takes the changes that are externalized in that file, it formats them nicely, and it posts them off to Slack. All right. Now, I'm going to show you that in action. If we come back to this tab here, we're on the update dependencies, and I'm going to now go to my shell, where I'm also going to show you the platform CLI tool a little bit. And you can see that I'm already locally checked out on the update dependencies branch, which means any platform CLI command that I run right now is going to operate on this branch, the update dependencies branch, and will affect this version of the site, the update dependencies version of the site, which is not the production site. Okay. If you've never used Drupal, you should know that there's a tool installed in Drupal called Drush, which is Drupal shell. And I'm going to just use that right now, platform drush status, to run a status command on that Drupal site in the cloud to see what version it is on. Okay, it's on 8.8.0 release candidate 1. Now my composer JSON file, if I show you that really briefly, it has specified that it wants anything, the latest major release above 8.8. So how does that reconcile? Above 8.8, okay, so if there's anything majorly released above 8.8, we should get that when we do the update. So I will now run manually the command that would normally run at 5 in the morning, because my time will be up before we get to 5 in the morning to watch the cron in action. So I'm going to trigger the cron manually, and the command for that is platform source operation run, and then the name of the command is update, and it's doing that on the branch that we're on, which is the update dependencies. And there we go. We see that it's happening. And if we come down here, I'm hoping that we're going to see in this moment a Slack message appear. The last one was from 1657. If my demo effect is in my favor today, then this works. So right now it's running Composer, it's updating the dependencies. You can see that happening down here. This was the first time I did a Slack integration was for this demo, by the way. That was pretty cool. I had to fish around a little bit in the documentation on Slack to figure out how to get my URL, but then I got it and it was magic. Okay, so my activity script has not fired. Let's see what happened on here. Okay, so it's still deploying here. That means it's not time to give up on the activity script. But this is what it'll look like. This is the one that I tested. As you can see from the timestamp, minutes before the Coding Earth started, I was still testing to make sure that I would not have a demo effect.
We are all doing this, Robert. Always up to the last minute, right?
Yeah, I was able to do it at a 3-minute cycle. Actually, consistently 3 minutes apart, 3 times in a row. I felt pretty well prepared for that. Oh, come on, where are you? Slack integration, please show up. No, it's just still going on. That's probably the composer cache was out and it took a while. Now it's actually, what's that? The import failed due to, oh no, that's nothing. That's Drupal configuration import. That's a Drupal feature if you want to merge the configuration state of your site, which is stored in the database. There's a functionality for externalizing that and then importing it into a different site to synchronize the configuration, which is the major danger of having state of your application stored in the database that also stores the data of your application. All right, that seems like it's done. Yes, it's done. And there we go. There's my activity script Slack update showing everything that just got updated. Not quite automatically because I triggered it manually, but this will also happen again every night at 5 in the morning from now on. Now, at this point, if I were the customer, I would be able to go here and look at my branches because I got this update and go to the update dependencies and go to the site and do some visual regression testing. It looks like this is visually regressed back into the 90s, but let's not comment on that. And if I wanted to, then I would be able to merge this branch into master, thus deploying it into production, okay? And that is the extent of my practical demo. Now, I showed a Slack integration, but if you imagined the activity script making calls out to Zapier or IFTTT, or I don't know yet how n8n.io works precisely, but it seems like it could call out to that as well, then you can see how this could be a very powerful tool for customizing your CI/CD pipeline on Platform SH. And with that, I'm going to check and see if there are any questions.
No, there are not.
I am not a historic Ruby veteran. I've actually written almost no Ruby code in my life. My coding lineage is that I started with Java and I moved to PHP, and I have done a modicum of JavaScript along the way. And then somewhere about 5, 6, 7 years ago, I really mostly stopped coding for production altogether and now earned my money almost exclusively by running my mouth.
It's also a good way to earn money, I'd say. It's usually working.
So if nobody has any questions, that's fine. I'll just cede the rest of the time to the next presenter and go read the n8n.io documentation.
Which is a good thing. So give it away for Robert virtually. Robert, you have to stop screen sharing, then I can show you your applause screen. I hope that I did it right. Oh, this was wrong.
Now Stefan is gone. Cool.
I can do it myself? No, I cannot. Oh my God, I prepared it, but I prepared it in the wrong way. So it's always the same. I have to talk while I'm sharing something which I'm not good at. Here you go.
Oh, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. That's fantastic.
Lars came up with that one, so I hope you like it.
It's straight from my generation. Thanks so much.
Bye. Thanks for coming.
Robert, chances are quite good that this might have... Did he leave already?
I think so.
Robert, come back. You still have 1 minute to answer the question. Here we go. Invite you. Can I just leave? This is not possible. There you go.
I'm back.
So chances are quite good that this is the last talk we've seen for you in quite a while, right?
That's true, yes.
You have something better to do than talking to people, right?
Yes, I'm going to deploy on Thursday, and specifically it's my wife who's deploying. So I'll just be standing there, giving moral support. But on Thursday, I end my life as a childless adult.
and it's going to be so great. I hope all the best. Wish you all the best for you and your wife, of course. And I cannot give you anything. I only brought the bear from my colleague's workplace, and we'll show it to you. Imagine lots of hugs, lots of kisses. All the best to you and your family, and
Thank you.
make the best out of it. It was
Thank you.
a pleasure having you. See you sometime in the future, and we'll
Definitely.
connect the internet and people with you. Thank you so much. Okay, with that, I'll invite Joao. If he's still here, Joao, are you with us? And I don't mean Mr. Enrique, I mean Mr. Cabrita. Here we go. You're invited. Hope everybody's still doing good.
Yay! Yay!
I don't even know if Joao Enrique is still along, but I guess he still is. Hello, Joao Cabrita. Good to have you here.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, audio is very good. I hope
Okay.
that all the people on YouTube are also still with us. So, Portugal is in the house. Where are you coming from currently? Or where's your office?
Sorry.
Which city are you located in? So where are you?
So I'm calling from Faro. I'm calling from my house at the moment in Faro, so southern Portugal, where the best beaches are, and the summer's coming along.
Let's say, right? Very good. So you brought a presentation with you. I think this is going to be philosophical. It's going to hit your brain. I'll give you the screen now. Good luck, Joao. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay, so let's see. So you should be seeing my screen now,
Yes, we can see it.
and you should be seeing my presentation now, right?
Very nice. And it's all
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So, well, now I'm sort of a bit embarrassed because my presentation is a bit more philosophical, so you won't see lots of code, or it might be refreshing depending on where you
as
stand.
long as it's concerning developers, everything is just welcome. Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah. So yeah. So as you might have noticed, the title of my talk is "Coding Fast and Slow," and I'll just get started. So I just have here a small page why I think you might want to listen to me. So I've been working as a software developer for 10 years, mostly as a consultant. So that I've sort of worked in a lot of different environments, from companies large and small, and for web applications in the cloud and embedded systems that crash and basically die when your application dies with it. And I've worked for banking, telecoms, and audio codecs. So most of what I'm talking about here is from looking at different environments and seeing things play out. And I'm currently working for Open Publishing, which is a company offering a SaaS for publishing. So if you want to publish books, or if you're a book publisher, you might want to purchase our services for helping with your ebook distribution and whatever. Yeah, and that's basically it. So onto the meat of the talk. So this is based on a book, which is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. So the book is basically about it's about a bit about the intersection between psychology and economics. So about how our brain works and how it can be fooled, and how we can better prepare ourselves for dealing with our brain's shortcomings. I think I read this quite a few years now. And it was one of the, in my opinion, one really transformative book, and the way that I think about how things happen and how basically people make mistakes and fix them. And so basically the book talks about how there are two modes of thinking, which the first of which is thinking fast, which is what you end up using when you're trying to solve problems such as this. So what is 2 + 2? So I think that everyone listening, as soon as you saw this, your brain immediately jumped onto the solution, which is obviously 4. And you don't, I mean, you don't even have to do any effort. It's just like you read this and it's automatically 2 + 2 is 4, 2 + 2 is 4. It's just the answer just pops into your brain. And that system also allows you to do weird things, which, for example, if you look at this, it's wrongly typed on purpose, but if you look at it, you probably don't have to make a lot of effort to figure out that this is what about reading. But it's kind of weird, right? And if you look at this, so how many animals were on the ark built by Moses? And there are actually 2 tricks here, one of which is that Moses didn't build the ark, it was Noah. But your brain, apparently, when you're reading through the sentence, has some type of trouble separating those 2 because they are both biblical characters. And so it's you sort of if you've never seen this question before, you're it's pretty easy to fall into this trap. And also, due to the way that you're used to reading, you might have also missed the typo. So on the second word, it's supposed to be many, but I intentionally mistyped it as mammy. So the brain allows you to both really get to solutions very quickly, but sometimes it skips over, glosses over things. And so just to recap, system 1, which is the system that does the fast thinking, is, well, like I just said, is pretty fast. It's pretty effortless. You don't need to do it doesn't even feel like thinking sometimes, but it also takes shortcuts to come to solutions. So it's pretty susceptible to bias and to being tricked. So this is, you can basically, if you're a pickpocket, this is what you want to take advantage of in order to steal from people and get away with it. And the other system is system 2, which does the slow thinking. But that basically gets used for problems such as this, which is, what is 387 times 64? And I don't know if anyone here in the audience had the answer immediately pop into their heads, but I'm guessing they probably didn't, and that if you're trying to listen to the talk and figure out the result at the same time, you'll have a very hard time doing it, and especially unless you're writing things down or whatever. And it's contrary to system 1 thinking, you can almost like physically feel yourself thinking about this. You really feel your brain like heating up and getting tired as you're thinking about this. Also, other types of problems, and this is sort of related to the reading problem that I presented before. So if you have, how many times does the letter E appear in this sentence? So you can read very fluently, but to do this requires a lot of effort, much more effort than you'd expect. Or if you try to do it very quickly, you're very likely to miss, because your brain is just tempted to go into system 1 because it doesn't need as much to do as much effort, but then you'll get the wrong answer. And so to recap on system 2, so system 2 is pretty slow. It requires effort, which is why you have a hard time using it all of the time, because otherwise your brain would just fry, and yeah, that wouldn't be the best outcome, I guess. But it's also absorbing. So one of the examples that is given in the book is that people are asked, for example, to do a task, which is count the number of passes in a basketball game. And then at the end, they also ask the people, oh, by the way, besides counting the passes, did you also see the gorilla? And most people just answered, what gorilla? And if you once you're alerted to the fact that there was a gorilla in the video, you'd rewatch it, and you'd notice that in between the basketball game, a guy dressed in a gorilla suit would just cross the field, right, going almost through the middle of the screen. But people were just so absorbed and that they completely missed that part. And so so that's the book in a very summarized way. Of course, the book is several hundred pages long, so so obviously this is a very summarized way to put it. But so the rest of this talk is about how that translates to coding. And the first thing I'd like to do is to sort of map the activities that we do while coding into the two types of systems. Obviously, this isn't as clear cut as this isn't a very clear cut division. So but it's I think it's a good starting point to figure out how we can think about coding with the two systems. So the first one is coding slow, and that, in my opinion, sort of translates more into activities that's used more in activities such as designing. When you're thinking about, when you're, for example, thinking about, so to do this operation, what data do I need? What parameters does this function I'm writing need to take in? And then you're sort of thinking about the constraints that are in place. And the second one is pretty similar, but sort of the reverse, which is when you're trying to debug or understand something. So you're, for example, looking at some code. You're looking at some code and you're thinking about, okay, so this parameter is this is a list. But what sort of, how many items does this list have? Can this list have no items? Can it be, can you actually pass null, for example, into this parameter? So things like this, and when you're trying to understand exactly what the code is trying to achieve. And on the other hand, you have stuff that you do just intuitively without even thinking, which is system one kind of thinking, which is like typing and writing code. You're actually not thinking about the exact syntax of the language. Usually, when you start, you probably have to pay a lot of attention to how you're typing things, but then gradually that just fades into the background, and you're not even thinking about the specific keys that you're typing, what exactly the constructs that you're using. If you want to write a class, you're just like class blah blah blah, and that just you don't have to do much effort to do it. Yeah, so typing and writing code and reading code, and on this I just like to add a small note to the programming language course, which is sort of I think this is well, this is my opinion that the Lisp guys actually got it right, because everyone the first reaction that everyone has about Lisp is that, oh my god, it has so many parens. But that's actually one of the first things that that your brain can wrap around, and the syntax just becomes secondhand. So and then underneath that you have a pretty expressive language that actually doesn't require a lot of work to get into when you're working with higher level constructs. And so now I'd like to speak about some of the strategies that I think are pretty useful for dealing with the way that the brain thinks and does these two ways. So basically, how do we take advantage of the fact that we have these two systems of thinking to make ourselves better coders? And in terms of process, I think the goals that we want to have is first of all is just to use system 2 only as necessary to avoid mistakes. So there is a saying in CrossFit, which is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And basically what that means is that you should basically focus on execution first. And once the execution is nailed down, then only then should you start to try to do things quickly. And then the second goal is to use System 1 as much as possible, because like I mentioned before, when you're using System 1, you can be much faster and you can do much more things. So for example, so this is like similar to how you learn to drive a car, and eventually you can drive a car and talk to someone else. And so you want to get in that state of being able to just do as much as you can automatically without having to think. And so I think my first suggestion or my first strategy is to create like checklists. So basically checklists, because many of the most common mistakes that we see in our programming every day is basically just forgetting about things. So for example, if you're and these are also things that cannot be really automated. So for example, if you're doing designing a feature, you want to design it, and you want to sort of have an expectation of how it performs. So for example, if you're doing something that involves the person submitting some data to apply for I don't know, to make some purchase or whatever, then you obviously expect it to be pretty fast. But if you're doing some reporting stuff, then you might then some slowness is acceptable. But then there are also other aspects, which, for example, data retention that gets to that is forgotten very often. You have concerns like compatibility and migrating existing data. And so the purpose of the checklist is really that when you're going through the checklist, you're forcing yourself to activate System 2 and think about those, because otherwise System 1 tends to get into those. System 1 it will usually pull you towards just start programming. And also, just to make it clear, I'm not sort of advocating like a huge design up front, but sometimes it's acceptable to just say that we can just keep data for as long as we want. This is not going to store lots of data and just sort of hand wave it and go around, but it's really just having the checklist helps you to not leave those things behind. So code review, I'm going to present an example after this, and also for releases. So there's stuff like versioning, which versioning isn't really something that's automatable, and so you need to do. If you have a release checklist where you're, I don't know, deploying some software or packaging some software for people to download, then you have to do the versioning by yourself. Then you might also want to list what the expected configuration changes are, what impact it could have. So if things go, and if you deploy it and things go wrong, what should you do instead of can't remember the expression, but just make something up at the moment. So checklists, again, activate System 2 and make sure that nothing gets left behind. So for example, for a code review, you'd want to check like 4 things. So the first is the semantics, which is if this piece of code that is supposed to do something, does it actually do that? Does it actually make sense to do things? Then the other one, which is what people usually gravitate to, which is syntax and styles. So Does it have the right indentation? Are you using a for loop or a comprehension or whatever? And then another one is tests, which it's pretty easy to, for example, review tests in a code review when they are there, but it's pretty easy to miss them when they're not there because you're just focused on you tend to jump straight into the code that's in front of you and forget about the things that are missing. And also the other one is how you can spin off work off of what's in front of you. So just what other improvements could be done, or what three features could be derived from this. And then also one of the things that you can do is have a larger vocabulary for concepts, be there patterns. So I guess almost everyone is familiar with patterns, which is like sort of patterns, specific ways in which you build classes and function to interact in conjunction to get a certain outcome, but also programming language or framework idioms. So for example, Ruby, you have in Python, for example, you have you sort of have the Pythonic way to write a piece of code, and knowing these is very important. Also knowing synonyms, because for example, in the functional programming, usually when you want to transform something into some other thing that has a specific name, which is a map, but in other programming languages, it might actually be called transform. And you also have, like, for example, reduction, which depending on the context might also be called a collect operation. And also learn some theory, like stuff like the cap theorem, and I don't know, like set theory, things like those. And the point of knowing these isn't actually to use them all the time. So that the point is not to know that the visitor pattern exists and always be using that, and always when you're coding always use a known pattern. But it's actually to recognize them when you come across them, and also use them when they're appropriate. And the biggest benefit, in my view, is even that you can communicate more effectively, because that allows you to. So the visitor pattern, I can just say visitor pattern, and if you know the pattern, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. But if I say, oh, you should build a class that then traverses the tree of elements, and each element then passes the visitor class into itself and whatever. So that's a pretty tedious way to do it, and it's pretty much guaranteed. You're pretty much guaranteed to lose the listener. And so an example of this is so this is a Python code sample, and it's so if you're used to Python, then you've most surely have seen this. So you're building an empty list, and then for every item in one other list, you're transforming that and putting it into the result list. So in this case, you have a list of strings, and then you're converting them to lowercase and putting them in the result list. And well, you can everyone can read this and understand what this does. But there's the coming back to what I just said. This is basically the map operation that I just talked about in functional programming. So if you know that, then you'd be inclined to look up the Python documentation and find out that there actually is a map method that does the exact same thing. So if I have the list, I just do list, which builds a list, which is the result of a sequence that's mapped by taking in the list of strings from the input, and then calls the lower method on each of those strings, and then puts that into a list. So regardless of whether you've seen Python before or whatever, you should be able to look at this and understand really what it's doing. And the crux here is that the idea is not to advocate that this is a better coding style than the other one. Well, Well, it sort of is, although for example, with comprehension, for example, it would be more debatable. But the bottom line here is that saying map is really the best way to say map, and saying like the factory pattern is the best way to say that it's a factory pattern. So the names matter, and it also it's also important to really get to the definitions and not just repeat terms that you've heard other people saying, because that then sort of tricks system one into thinking that you're talking about the same thing because you're using the same language, but you're not actually doing that. And so the third thing that I would suggest is, this is really nothing new, but it's also it's focused practice. So doing things like katas and getting into the habit of doing things in a certain way, so that you don't. So that this is sort of a fallback from the checklist, so that you don't keep having to go back to the checklist, because in some contexts that's not really a pragmatic way to do this. And the goal here is to do what I sort of heard described as falling into the pit of success. So rather than having success at the top of the mountain, and you have to climb the mountain to reach success, but then if you lose your balance, then you fall off the mountain and you're back at square one. Instead, you want to sort of condition yourself so that when you lose balance, you actually fall into the pit of success, and success is at the bottom of that pit. So when you do fall, you just roll right into success. And what I've listed here are basically practices that in my experience are almost universally applicable. So they're almost always the right thing to do, but they and when after you've practiced them, you actually take as much time to do them as you. So, for example, if you use dependency injection, if you're used to writing code that uses that's written to support dependency injection, that takes you the same time as it would take you to write code that doesn't support dependency injection, but the outcomes are very different, because code that supports dependency injection is much easier to test. And well, the same also goes for layered or hexagonal design, where you're separating your business logic, you're isolating it from the interfaces so that you can add different interfaces. Testing is another one. So once you get used to testing, that sort of comes naturally, and you don't take the time that you might take to write the test actually pays off in things coming back because they really didn't work, or testing them manually or whatever. Also following checklists, so getting in the habit of actually looking at the checklists and following them, and also just plain automation is also a final thing. And what this does really, coming back to our two systems analogy, is just if you do things, if you repeatedly do things with system 2, eventually then they get fed into system 1. So you're able to do them with much less effort, and you don't really need to think about them. And if you practice them properly, then you won't be susceptible to the biases of system 1. And then the final one is really just code reviews. This again isn't groundbreaking process, but it's really just code reviews. I think the mention here is because code reviews are the perfect place for you to stop and really think about it. So basically to switch back from system 1, where you're just doing things naturally and out of habit, and switch back into your thinking mode. The first item that I have here is always be the first to review your own code. And so, for example, in my own workflow, I'll usually do a small bit of work, and then when I'm kind of confident that that's done, I just push it and I look at our source code system. I compare that to the master branch or the previous revision or whatever, and I review it myself as if I were a different person. And almost always I just find that something is missing, whether I forgot to do tests, whether I forgot to properly document something. So I'll fix that. I'll fix that with very goal-oriented. So I'll just go in and fix that without thinking about it a lot. But then I'll go back to the code review and I'll review the whole thing again, which also plays off into what I mentioned earlier about learning to do small changes, because that also allows you to make the review small. Because if you make a change with 2,000 lines, you're going to take half an hour, or you're going to fall back into system one again, and you're just going to gloss over the code. So the idea is to do this in a sort of agile way, where you're not thinking too much, but then you're looking at what you've just done and deciding on what direction you should go again. And the second one is just to deconstruct smells. So this relates to code smells. So when you look at some code and it doesn't quite feel right, and the idea here is to not just do a sort of knee-jerk reaction like this doesn't look right, but actually to stay with it and figure out whether this is just me finding it weird. Because, for example, with some smells, if you're not used to tasting beer, for example, it tastes funny. But once you get used to it, then so it's just a matter of acclimating to some things. But sometimes it really is a valid concern, and you need to really bring forward and express what you're feeling about that code. And the bottom two are sort of what I just mentioned about the checklist. So just reminding yourself that there are other things besides the code in front of you that might be missing. And yeah, that's basically all I had to for you today. Just in the nick of time.
Thank you very much, Joao. It was a pleasure listening to you, actually. So since there are no official questions in our question box, you notice that usually then I will ask a question. Now, maybe if you think about the concepts you just introduced, is there or was there some kind of situation in your professional life where you noticed that it maybe went wrong for you and that you should have switched to the other kind of doing things?
Well, I would say that pretty much that happens pretty frequently, which is which is sort of the problem with System 1, is that because you're not like actively thinking about it, you're just like sort of you end up just going through the motions. So it's really very easy to fall into that. And the checklists thing is one of the things that I don't use them as much as that much, but I'm a huge proponent, and in the last few places where I've been, I've been strongly suggesting that people that we start using them, precisely because these things keep happening, and so it's just I presented the code review thing, but obviously it's not actually I might have to put the checklist on a post-it note on my screen and just remember myself. So even with the checklist, sometimes you have the tendency to just think, just to feel you get too confident and then just jump over that. So that's there are also I also forgot to not forgot, but didn't put here, but things, for example, like pair programming. So pair programming is basically an ongoing code review, and what that really does is that you end up having one person that can be working in System 1 and working thinking about what to type and fixing the code issues, and the other person is really thinking on a much higher level and thinking on potential issues and really looking at the code and considering the trade-offs that are being done. And it's like switching between the person that's in front of the keyboard. That also provides that sort of cycling between system 1 and system 2 where people are alternating.
Okay, thank you very much. Of course, you also get that applause image as everybody gets. And it was really good to have again someone from Portugal again on our screen, because as you might notice, this whole Coding Earth thing that we're doing was located. So we started in Berlin, then we went to Leipzig, then to Stuttgart, and then to Portugal. There's some reason why we are now in Portugal, but it's always good to have you Portuguese people here, and especially all the meetups that we had in person over the last couple of years. They were always a pleasure being with you. I'm really missing that. I hope that we can return to Portugal very soon to do this kind of talk in person, and you can hear the real applause going on. Okay. So
yeah, I just like that, because this is, I guess people, if people are interested in this, I could just fill up a whole 2-hour session just talking about this and discussing this with people. So if people want to, you put out my Twitter handle, so people are free to DM me about any of this. I'll also be joining the Coding Earth community, so people will probably find me there. So you're free to ask any other questions.
You can find all the recaps and everything on the coding.earth website, https:// of course, coding.earth. Everything's written there, I guess. If we missed something, Joao or Robert, if you're still here, or Max, just tell us and we will fix everything on the website as you might find it suited. Thank you so much, Joao. Hello, Joao. Good to have you back on stage.
I'll just see myself out.
The last thing.
This was a very good presentation, because sometimes the developers are so focused on coding that they don't step away from the keyboard and think about the bigger picture, right? So it's good to have someone thinking about how we can progress, how we can evolve as coders, because it's not all about code. We have to develop new ways, new tools, new procedures to code. So this is really important to think about this bigger picture and how to solve this kind of problems. Very good presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Same here.
All right.
I think the last thing we have to do is find. I got one thing. I got a spoiler for the next time, because somebody approached me. It was also a little Twitter conversation. You can already look forward for the next session, whether it might be in July. I don't know, maybe so some Tuesday in July, obviously. You can already look forward to Jill Fink giving a presentation about Node.js memory leaking. And if you are a Node.js coder, male or female or whatever you are, you know that like memory leaks in JavaScript are the worst things that can happen to you. It's even better than in Java, I'd say. And I think he got a very good talk on this one. So if you're interested in Node.js, this is yours. If you want to give a talk at Coding Earth, wherever you are on Earth, we don't care about the country, or about your color of the skin, or about the religion. We don't care. We only care about your time zone, because you have to join us somewhere. Just approach us here on Twitter, on our contact form on Coding Earth, in the chat, maybe wherever you want, and propose a talk for Coding Earth next time. Anything else from your sides, guys?
All good.
Looking up for the next one.
It's coding.earth, not codingearth.io that I was telling you about.
Everybody got it. That is coding.earth. It's built on Gatsby. It's built with Grommet. Grommet just released 2.14. Everything is now fixed. We don't got any errors now anymore. Awesome stuff. Learn Gatsby. Gatsby is great. Lars doesn't like it. He's a Tailwind guy. If you want to do a Tailwind talk next time, do Tailwind. Everybody loves Tailwind. I'll do the Grommet stuff. And Joao might even give a lightning talk about the date object in JavaScript. I've seen a video of him and he's not proud of it, but it's really a great video. We can add more stuff to it next time, maybe. Okay, I will now end this broadcast here. You find the recording on YouTube, I think, immediately after that, and I will try to put everything together so you can rewatch the talks individually and put them on the website.
See you next time.
All right.
It was a pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Have a
See
good
you.
one. Cheerio. Good night.